This is Wellness by Design, and I'm your host, Andrew Whitfield Cook. Joining us today is Jennifer Harrington, a naturopath who, through her own journey with polycystic ovarian syndrome and pain, now specialises in helping women throughout their perimenopausal journey. Welcome to Wellness by Design's Jen. How are you?
I'm very well, thanks, Andrew. It's absolutely a pleasure to be here with you today.
Thank you. Now, let's go through a real minutiae subsection of the whole management of perimenopause, and that is phytoestrogens. And this is something that is intensely interesting to me because it's been so controversial. So, first of all, what is or are phytoestrogens?
Phytoestrogens are compounds found in plants that have an estrogen like effect. They're more accurately estrogen modulators, as they have both estrogenic and anti estrogenic qualities.
So, this is something, again, that's really interesting to me. And you'll get medicos who, forgive me, they are medicos who do not know about phytoestrogens, and they say they're estrogenic, therefore they're always bad. They're not estrogens, right?
No, and one of the key differences between human estrogens and phytoestrogens is their ability to bind to estrogen receptors. So, human estrogens have equal affinity to estrogen receptor alpha and estrogen receptor beta, but phytoestrogens have a tenfold affinity for estrogen receptor betas.
Okay, so therefore one would think that very simply the dose is or determines the effect, but that's not the
Well,
case.
it's also when we look at what the different receptors do. So, estrogen receptor alpha stimulates a lot of the reproductive system. So, breasts, ovaries, uterus, and also the hypothalamus in the brain. So, it also can have a proliferative effect on those areas. And that's where a lot of the downside of hormone therapy comes in, where it's your estrogen receptor betas that have an anti proliferative effect. So, therefore, they're safer. But also, when we're looking at the differences in the brain, the alpha receptor betas are on the hippocampus. And this is also related to memory, learning, concentration, moods, all these wonderful things. They both work on the bones, they both work on the heart. Um, the estrogen receptor beta also helps with muscles, so it helps to reduce your sarcopenia or your muscle loss that can happen with the menopausal transition. Alpha is more related to liver, where beta is more related to kidneys. Um, and also, beta is your metabolic syndrome, so it helps with blood sugar management, weight management, and also mitochondrial function. So you can see that there's a lot of
Ah,
differences, and yes, so your normal human estrogen does both, where the phytoestrogens really have, as I mentioned before, that tenfold affinity for the beta estrogen receptors and therefore have only the good effects without the dangerous effects.
yeah. I mean, you'd have to be really, really silly with intake of phytoestrogens to have an overall massively estrogenic effect, almost to the point of having a psychological issue. Correct?
Yeah, the phytoestrogens work depending on the estrogen that you have available in your system at the time. So if you've got lots of estrogens available in your system at the time, they're going to have an anti-estrogen like effect. So when we're looking at the perimenopausal experience, women can have elevated estrogen or an estrogen dominant type effect, and therefore the phytoestrogens are going to have an anti-estrogenic effect. Versus in the flip side, in menopause, when you've made it through the transition, you're more likely to have a lower amount of circulating estrogen, and therefore the phytoestrogens are more likely to have an estrogenic type effect.
Okay, so I'm just wondering about cyclical levels of estrogens um, and dietary levels of phytoestrogens being hopefully more regularly consumed. When you're talking about having that anti estrogenic effect overall, because it's basically binding to the estrogen receptors in place of endogenous estrogen. Do you have to be aware of how much and which types of phytoestrogens you're consuming pertaining or relevant to which condition you're treating? And I guess where I'm thinking here is like perimenopause, what you're talking about, but you mentioned heart disease as well, or heart health, where, for instance, soy has been shown to be of benefit, whereas other people go off and they have, soy milk, soy breakfasts, soy this, soy that, and everything's a soy, and they have way too much soy. But they're looking at it from a female hormonal perspective. Am I on the right track there? Or is that a very confusing question?
I totally hear what you're saying about soy, Andrew, and I am not a soy fan. And a lot
Right.
of it comes down to what actually happens with the metabolism of soy. So we consume soy, we start chewing it, we've got our digestive acids, our digestive enzymes, and what that produces is the isoflavones. But the isoflavones still need to be digested by your own digestive microbiome in order to get the equal, which is the end stage metabolite, which is your active. Now, when we're looking at different cultures, Asian cultures have generally 50 to 60% equal metabolizers. Whereas a Western woman, I've only got a 20 to 30% chance of actually making that metabolite. So I'm very limited chances of getting benefit from soy, where there's also dangers of soy consumption. Soy is one of the most genetically altered crop on the planet. Therefore, it's heavily
Mm.
sprayed with pesticides and herbicides. And as I'm sure we'll get to later, these actually block receptors. So even if you could produce it, if it's heavily sprayed, you're blocking it. So what's the point of taking it in the first place? But there's other downsides of soy consumption. And we look at it as being a goitrogen. So goitrogens inhibit iodine uptake into the thyroid and can produce goiters. Iodine is a nutritional cofactor that we need to facilitate binding onto a receptor. So again, it's that double whammy. Yeah. It's also a trypsin inhibitor, which can cause a lot of
Yes.
digestive issues like bloating and flatulence. It contains phytates, and these are anti-nutrients. So they're also going to be absorbing your iodine and your iron and your calcium and magnesium. Yeah, that for me, the risk reward ratio is not there.
Yeah.
But
Look, I
if the woman
to-
sitting in front of you is Asian, eating a traditional Asian style diet, and wants to have traditional fermented soy products, and that's the key, the traditional fermented soy products. Things like the miso and the natto and the tempeh. Sure, give it a go. I got no problems in that scenario. But in the Western scenario, what we're buying at the supermarket, the textured vegetable proteins, these and the soy isolates and the soy milks, these do not have the benefits that we're looking for. And we just can't convert them. We're not getting equal. I sent you a study to add into the show notes. And in that particular study, it was only a small study, but they only had a 7% conversion, people that were able to convert soy into the
wow.
isoflavones into equal.
Right. So thank you so much for clearing that up, because I must admit I've wavered um, throughout my career, but I used to use very, very high doses of soy isoflavones,
Mm.
and now I restrict it only for men and only for a particular condition. But I do admit that there's reasonable data with cardiovascular health. But
Mm.
I love your points about, okay, maybe so, but what are you doing along the way?
But there's
You also answered
alternatives.
yeah. Well, you also answered something else for me, and that is how easy it is to fall into the trap of thinking that research on one cultural group is relevant for everybody. And that's not necessarily the case, demonstrated here. Thank you so much. That's been a bing light bulb moment for me.
So when we're
So you
looking at the
mentioned
Western
alternatives.
population, oh, sorry.
Yeah,
When we're looking at the Western population, the primary phytoestrogen that we consume are lignans. Lignans are found in flaxseed. Flaxseed has 800 times more lignans than any other food source. So why are we looking to soy when we have flax seeds? So, as I
right.
mentioned, flax seeds are a phytoestrogen, they're a lignan, and when we have a healthy digestive microbiome, they can metabolize that into your enterolignans, and it's the enterolignans that are your active end stage metabolite.
That's right. And you just mentioned the microbiome there, and we were speaking about fermented foods earlier. So obviously
Mm.
we're talking about how bacteria can work on these foods and what the end products are out of that. So can we discuss where phytoestrogens fit into therapy? And I
Mhm.
and I guess I don't want to cover prioritization now because I really want to cover that later as to where they sit. But where do they fit into therapy with, say, different conditions? What do you
Mm.
favor
So,
phytoestrogens
I
for instance?
I'm only really looking at research for the menopausal transition because
Gotcha.
that's who I see. That I specialize in the menopausal transition. So women that are having symptoms, traditional menopausal symptoms, hot flushes, night sweats, mood, cognition. If they're worried about their bone health, if they're worried about their heart health, if they're having issues with blood sugar regulation and weight, if they're having issues with energy levels and fatigue, this is where phytoestrogens can, and I say can because it really depends on three other factors. And Andrew, are you okay if I go into the three other factors why phytoestrogens may or may not work? Yep. Okay,
Please
great.
do. Please do.
All right. So the first one, as we've sort of already hinted on, is the microbiome.
Mm.
And I quite often use microbiome testing in the clinic because if you don't have the acids and enzymes, you're not going to be digesting anything. Your microbiome doesn't have a chance because you haven't digested in the first place. We then look at the microbiome. So we're having a look to make sure that there's not dysbiosis, that we don't have the wrong guys and too much of the wrong guys, or maybe not enough of the good guys, because we need the microbiome in order to
Mm.
produce your final stage metabolites, which are the active constituents that do all these wonderful jobs. The second thing I look at is when we've got, say, we've got phytoestrogen and we've got the receptor, there are certain things that help with the receptor binding. So, when we're looking at cofactors for receptor binding, we have nutritional cofactors. We need to make sure we have enough of things like iodine and vitamin A and zinc and magnesium, these beautiful nutrients. So quite often I'm also looking at nutritional deficiencies because we need to correct that. Otherwise, the phytoestrogens don't have a chance. And I also have a look at what things block the receptor from being able to accept your phytoestrogen or your estrogen in that regard. And these are xenoestrogens. So, xenoestrogens are environmental compounds that have an estrogen like effect in the body. And Zea, which is a mycotoxin from mold, is a major problem because there are so, like, we all live, well, we don't all live. Here in Sydney, Australia, it's quite a humid environment and we are prone to mold. And it could be that you have mold growing in your house that is undetected, it's not treated, and that is blocking your receptors from being able to uptake or to accept your phytoestrogen.
The you're talking about living in a humid environment, and it's really interesting speaking with experts like Nicole Bilsma, Lisa McDonald, Amy Skilton. Forgive me, Amy Corber. She's married. uh, and the issue of water damage buildings. So it's not just related
Mm,
to the environment, but the actual damage that rain, these weather events do to our homes. And I thought I was resistant to this, our home. Nope, not so. Found places around the home and we went, oh my goodness. So it's really
mm.
prevalent, far more than what I thought previously. Can I just go back
And
though,
who would have thought we would
Jen?
have gone there? We're
Yeah,
talking about menopause and now
yeah,
we're talking about
I
mold.
know. Andrew's tangential mind. But anyway, I'll come back. I need to go back right to the start. And that was when we were talking about definitions, we never really covered off on, I know there's so many, but the major phytoestrogens. So you mentioned equal, but there's also like diazinon, genestin, um, um, and then you get some of these prenyl isoflavones as well. Can you
Yeah,
discuss
so
some of these molecules?
mm, the three that I look for are equal from soy, your
Yep.
enterolignans from your flaxseed, and your urolithins, which we haven't discussed yet, from pomegranate. They're the three that I quite
Ah,
often see in the research. And even when we're looking at, so soy, I don't recommend. When we're looking at flax and we're looking at pomegranate, they both have a high affinity for the estrogen receptor beta. So they do all the benefits that we discussed before, but they're also slightly different. So flaxseed also has added benefits on the digestive system, where pomegranate has extra benefits for the mitochondria. So they're similar, but they're also slightly different.
yeah, this is really interesting when you mentioned mitochondria. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so pomegranate, if you can digest it and metabolize it to the end product of urolithin, and there are various kinds of urolithins, these are mitochondrial superfoods. They're very good
Hmm.
for autophagia. So, autophagia of all your organelles, but especially for the mitochondria. So, they help to recycle old and damaged and worn out mitochondrial cells so that you get new, vibrant mitochondrial cells and better energy production.
So with autophagy, that's a real interesting thing with regards to so many conditions, especially proliferative conditions like cancer. I guess what's in my mind here is things like prostate cancer. Where do you use or favor the use of pomegranate phytoestrogens over others? What conditions?
I more if the woman in front of me, I'm sorry, I know you mentioned prostate cancer. I don't see men.
I
So
know. Not
I'm
many women
looking
have
more
prostate. No, I get it.
if fatigue is the primary concern, then I would be looking more at pomegranate. But to be honest with you, Andrew, I'm more likely to use a combination of phytoestrogens because I like to think of food as medicine. So why can't you have different sources? Like flax seeds, the dose is 2 tablespoons a day. That's easy
Right.
to
Okay.
to consume. With pomegranate, we're looking at a quarter a cup of the arils. So that's something. Like I had a smoothie before we got on the call today, and I had both of those in it and more. I had some broccoli sprouts and berries and other things. So why limit to one?
So, all right, I'm going to ask you about recipes there because flax seeds are a very interesting food, kind of like chia, where you chew them and everything gets caught in your teeth and you get that pastiness. So, preparation and also raw material sourcing. Like you've got to be cautious about when you bite into them if they're bitter. Is that right? They're going rancid.
Yeah, see, I buy mine as whole seeds. I've got a
Yep.
special coffee grinder that I use for my seeds. I pop them in there and I grind them fresh. And then I use the
Cool.
ground flaxseed that I'm popping in my smoothies or I'm putting them into my food. So I wouldn't actually know if I put it in my mouth if it was bitter because it's already ground and they're all mixed in. But definitely with flaxseed, you want to grind it fresh. You want to hopefully consume straight away. But if you've got leftovers in a dark, airtight, refrigerated, and used within the next couple of days before it does go rancid. But definitely don't go
Gotcha.
buy the pre ground stuff because who knows when it was ground. how old
Yeah.
it is.
What about pomegranates though? You were talking about arils?
Mm. Yeah, so when you're looking at the pomegranate, when you cut it open, inside the
Yeah.
arils are the fruit and the seed.
Oh, right.
Yes. So
Didn't
when you're eating them, you actually want to chew the seed because in the seed you have omega 5. It's actually the world's richest source of omega 5. And omega 5 is one of the strongest regulator of insulin levels and blood sugar levels. There has been some promising research looking at it actually being equal to or possibly more effective than the current medication. So,
Wow.
yes, chew on your pomegranate seeds. You can actually eat the outer pomegranate shell, but it's so
Mm.
bitter. I can't do it. So I don't,
Yeah.
unless you love bitter foods. Oh, yuck.
Um, I mean, it's even a knack getting out the arils. Thank you for clearing up what they were,
Yeah.
what
Oh,
they
you
are.
can buy them
Getting
frozen.
it. Oh, so can you go through this? Where do you get these from?
So mine I got from Coles, possibly not the best place to
Yeah.
source them from, but I can buy them frozen like I would buy my frozen blueberries, buy my
Okay.
frozen pomegranate, and I just take a scoop, chuck it in my smoothie with everything else.
Big lesson for me today about these seeds, because I remember we used to have a pomegranate tree, and I'd break open the thing and try and tease apart and open up and tease apart the flesh, how they're caught up in these. It's almost like a
Yep.
walnut. Um, and I'd just chew
Or
the
law of
fruit and spit
signature.
out the seeds. Well,
Oh
yeah, but I
no,
should have
don't
been
spit
chewing the
out the
seeds. I know.
seed.
Mm.
Yes. Oh, you know now.
So, yes, preparation of other things as well. Let's go through some. What else did you have in your
Um,
smoothie?
okay, so my smoothie this morning, um, I sometimes put coconut milk, but I was out, so it was just water today. I have
Mm.
collagen, I have fiber, and then I put in my frozen. So I do sometimes put a couple of slices of frozen banana just because it absorbs some of the grittiness. When you are blending things like pomegranate, you can be a bit gritty. So the banana helps
Mm.
with that. I then put in some mixed berries and some pomegranate, and I'm pretty sure that's it this morning. So yeah, I had my collagen, my fiber, my phytonutrients, blend it, drink it. That's my morning smoothie done. I also had MCT oil in it. I have a
Right.
C8 caprylic acid. So chuck some MCTs in there, get my brain working for the day, and it tastes delicious. Food is medicine.
Can I al- can I also ask about helping women throughout the
Mm,
perimenopausal period? It's
mm.
been shown that many women in this age bracket um, are suffering from a relative protein deficiency, if you like. Do you add protein
Definitely.
into your smoothies? Yeah.
So in my particular case, I'm a big meat eater, Andrew. I have no problems with having a steak or chicken or fish. I just put collagen in mine. But if I've got a
Right.
woman who is maybe more on the vegetarian or the vegan side, I definitely protein is so important, especially for reducing sarcopenia, the muscle related
Mm.
wasting with age. So we need our muscles. Otherwise, we're at risk of falling over, breaking a hip, and it being the beginning of the
Mm.
end.
Not good. So pea proteins, what sort of proteins, particularly for vegetarians?
For vegetarians. Um,
Uh-oh.
yeah. um, Yeah, it really depends on the individual woman sitting in front of me. If what depending on what she can tolerate, I may be looking at maybe even some whey based, but she may or may not be able to tolerate whey, so we might not go there. And if she's vegan,
Yeah.
she won't have it, but if she's vegetarian, she may. You just got to use what you can, Andrew. I don't have any particular favorites, especially when it comes to vegetarian proteins. I'm not
No,
a
that's
big
fine.
fan, but
Getting off onto a little bit on the supplement arena, and that is
mm,
you're now seeing phytoestrogens from hops, from is it Russian asparagus, and other sources, not just the lignans and things like that. Uh, do you ever use these in your management of perimenopause, or do you tend to favour foods as the major
Mm.
source?
See, I really see my role is setting a woman up for success. And for me, the ultimate success is for her to be able to use food as medicine moving forward in the long run. Because also, when we're thinking about age, like retirement might come, income's going to reduce. If she can use food as medicine, then that's for me the ultimate success. So I want to look at what do I need to do now in order for her to be able to metabolize and utilize the the phytoestrogens moving forward in the future. And I tend to stick to the ones that I've seen in the research, and there is an abundance of research on flax seeds and pomegranates. Something we haven't discussed is broccoli, but I don't want to go down the broccoli path because broccoli does so much. We will be here for the rest of the day.
Another podcast.
Possibly.
Look, there's so much, but on that note, do you tend to favour a concentrated extract, like a supplement of broccoli sprout extract, or do you use broccoli sprouts?
I would supplement in that particular case, in that
Gotcha.
just that when we're looking at the therapeutic dose of broccoli, it's 500
Mm.
grams, which is 2 heads of broccoli. I love broccoli. It's my favorite vegetable in the world. I'm not eating 2 heads of broccoli every day.
No. But
Where
having said that, with regards to the supplement, some people are very concerned about it being a goitrogen. How real is this in the doses that we're using, though?
mm. Also, there's things you can do to reduce its goitrogenic activity. So if you're looking at the food, you can ferment it, you can sprout it. So I use sprouted. This if I do use supplements, it's a sprouted broccoli. That
Gotcha.
way, it doesn't have its goitrogenic effect. And if you're
Gotcha.
using it food,
Oh,
you can also slightly steam it. That also helps to reduce the goitrogens.
right. Okay. Um, Not being a fan of raw broccoli, although I have done it. Steamed is the way to go. um,
You
but
just need to watch how
I
long you steam it for, because when you steam it for more than 10 minutes, you've
the
deactivated
myrosinase.
yeah,
Yeah, the myro.
yeah.
So myrosinase, and that releases glucoraphanin. And then, of course, you have to go into the raw material and how much raw myrosinase and glucoraphanin is in there. But anyway, separate podcast. So thinking about a therapy, thinking about diets of perimenopausal women, how do
Mm.
you find, or are these women used to or open to these changes in dietary management, if you like, or are they already basically the healthy woman?
Mixed bag, Andrew. Perimenopausal women are all shapes and sizes. Some of them are highly, highly motivated, very healthy women. Some of them are not. But what I would say across the board is they're a highly motivated bunch that whatever they're experiencing, they don't choose to experience, they want a different outcome. And I've found in my experience that they are wonderful women to work with because they do what you ask them to do, because they want a
Well,
healthier, happier life.
well, absolutely happy. I would imagine their partners would as well. But anyway, so with regards to holistic management,
Mm.
how readily do you use phytoestrogens with medications? And how do you find their effect? Do you find any issues with instituting reasonable dose of phytoestrogens on with a person who might be on HRT?
Yeah, if you're using food based medicine, I have no problems with combining it with HRT. And if anything, some of the phytoestrogens are going to help reduce the hyperproliferative effect of your hormone replacement therapy.
And you've also discussed gut health. So then we've got to discuss enterohepatic recirculation of estrogens. I don't know about phytoestrogens, but anyway, um, do you ever do any assessments of certainly let's say, the hydroxyestrogens, do you
Mm.
even test any levels of phytoestrogens in the blood, or do you just rely on the evidence and their benefits?
Mm. I'm not aware of any tests to check for phytoestrogens in the blood. There are in the research, they're having a look, but what they're looking at is fecal samples. So, certainly not something that I have access to. Although I do microbiome testing, but that doesn't tell me whether they've got phytoestrogens in the blood or not. But it does tell me about the beta glucuronidase, which you were talking about with the recirculation of the estrogens. So I do have an idea of how high or how low that is. And the higher that is in a woman, the more likely they're going to be experiencing issues with estrogen dominance. So that's when I'm looking at tests, because you did ask about testing. So testing, I generally
Yeah, yeah.
start with a GI map or some sort of microbiome testing. From that, I will then look for key nutritional deficiencies because I want to make sure that the receptor has its cofactors so that we can utilize these phytoestrogens. I then look at toxicity testing. So I might do a myco panel if I'm suspecting water damage or mold. I might do a GPL tox if I'm worried about chemical exposure. I might do a HTMA if I'm worried about heavy metal exposure. That tends to be my starting point because phytoestrogen therapy is not going to work if you've got issues with any of these three spaces. So correct that first. And then we can add in the phytoestrogens, which will be the long term, hopefully, long term maintenance for that particular woman. But it's making sure she can actually utilize the phytoestrogens in the first place.
And obviously, when we're talking about maximizing the availability of nutrients, you've got to go right back to how people chew and in a relaxed state. Do you ever favor the use of digestive enzymes to help things along in the initial stages at least?
Definitely. And we know that during that perimenopause, menopause transition, that your digestive acids and enzymes do reduce. So when I get my microbiome test, it also tells me about a woman's digestive capabilities. So then I can see, do I need to utilize any of these other strategies like adding in digestive enzymes or digestive acids?
And what about things like NAC or other things to help hepatic detoxification or liver
Mm,
function? What about herbs, for instance?
yeah. I don't tend to use NAC because I quite like using broccoli. And NAC actually plays around or limits or blocks your ability to use your sulforaphane. So I would prefer to use sulforaphane and to get an active benefit from that. So I don't tend to use too much NAC. If I do have issues with really high beta glucuronidase, I tend to go more towards your DIM. I'm not a fan of IC3 or your indole 3 carbinol just because it's so what's the word, Andrew, I'm looking
Well, it's
for?
unstable to start. Well, it's
Thank
unstable
you.
to start.
Thank you.
But you but
So
you
I
can't.
yeah.
It's one of the very few supplements I'm very cautious of. The problem with
Mm,
I3C is that you can't control what it's going to condense to, because the stable condensation product that doesn't cause proliferative outcomes is 3,3-DIM, or 3,3-diindole methane. I am a fan of that supplement, but I get hesitancy in some people, and
mhm.
certainly it only sort of does one, whereas broccoli does so many things.
Yes. Yes, I've heard Dr. Christine Horton talk about it. It's like the Christmas
Christine
tree
Hook, yeah,
light. So you
yeah.
flick on one light switch and all the lights on the Christmas tree go on. I like that idea that
Hmm.
you're giving one thing that does so many things within the body. I think
Yeah, sure.
that's important because we
What
can't
about
be taking 100 supplements.
no, that's right. But on that line, what about simple supplements like, zinc B6 and magnesium to help with estrogen metabolism? I'm just thinking about the uh, biochemical conversion of pregnenolone, progesterone, and then into your estrogens down track.
Mm.
Even simple things like zinc B6 magnesium can help, but how much do you use those, or do you tend to favor
So I
food?
test. I test,
Okay.
especially looking at zinc and copper, because as we go through the menopausal transition, we may be accumulating more copper. So we might need a lot of zinc in order to counteract that. So I would do a higher dose. Yeah,
Mhm.
testing is the answer, Andrew. If you test, then you know, you don't have to guess. So, and you can
There,
also retest
there's
later.
There's so much more to go into here because I've got 20 questions and we haven't got time. Jen, where can people find out more? Where can practice find out more so they can have a more effective use of phytoestrogens and overall a more effective treatment regimen, if you like, for women going through their perimenopausal era?
So I would start with my website, which is menopausenaturalsolutions.com. My podcast is actually the same name, so Menopause Natural Solutions. And I also have a book, From Invisible to Invincible, The Natural Menopause Revolution, if you prefer reading.
If you prefer. And obviously that would be fully referenced.
It is.
Wonderful. Can't wait to see that. Jen, thank you so much for taking us through, again, just a little tip of the use of phytoestrogens and what we've got to be aware of, our guts, but also how you address that in women. I love the way that you favour foods, and because of reasonable things that are going to happen in couples, people's, and certainly women's lives as they enter retirement, as you say, and things like that. So you're looking outside of just here they are now. Let's look down the track. I love the way that you're thinking about their finances and how it can be maintained throughout their lifetime. Thank you so much for joining us today on Wellness by Design.
Well, thank you for having me, Andrew. It's been a pleasure.
And remember that you can find all of the show notes and other resources on the designsforhealth.com.au website, and also catch up on the other episodes of Wellness by Designs on your favourite podcast app. Thanks so much for joining us today. I'm Andrew Whitfield Cook, and this is Wellness by Designs.